Dowsing, Divining and Diagnosis. A lecture delivered to the British Society of Dowsers on October 15, 1936, by Mr. H. H. Langelaan. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, let me first call your attention to the statement of the primary object of our society, which is to encourage the study of all matters connected with the perception of radiation by the human organism with or without an instrument, also to spread information amongst members about the use of dowsing for medical and other purposes. Some of the experiences which I propose to relate to you may appear so remote from the generally accepted idea of dowsing that I thought it better to prepare you by calling your attention to the comprehensive nature of our study, rather than surprise you by plunging in at the deep end without warning. In an article by Dr. Adolf Seelig, published in our journal for September 1936, he mentions that it is now a fact accepted by science that everything radiates, but apparently there is an exception to this fact, for Dr. Oscar Brunler, in his address given before you on February 18, 1936, stated that during his researches he found that the blood of people suffering from cancer does not radiate, whilst the blood of all other men radiates, no matter what the ailment. However, to the general statement that everything radiates I add another general statement, that everything has an aura, or atmosphere. It is general knowledge that the Earth has an aura, or atmosphere, and its distance from the surface of the Earth has been measured, but it is less well known that trees, buildings, minerals, water, animals, and human beings also possess an aura of their own. The atmosphere of the Earth is plastic and is impressed by the radiation of energy from the Sun and planets transmitted in waves of light and heat, and the experiment I am about to relate will illustrate the action of radiation from the stars on the aura of a pebble. Anyone can repeat this experiment without the slightest difficulty. My wife and I were sitting on the seashore amongst a crowd of people on a summer's afternoon, when we thought we would test our ability to obtain impressions of radiations. My wife picked up a pebble from the beach and held it with her fingertips. I selected another one and held it in a similar manner. Then we closed our eyes and waited for results. A great stillness came over me, then it became chilly, with a 2:00 in the morning feeling in the air which is known to those who have slept out of doors all night. Gradually it became intensely dark, but in a little while the stars shone out in great brilliancy. It was a wonderful sight. Just then my wife gave a little startled cry. She described to me how it seemed to her as if a wave came up to her and passed right over her head. She had noticed the transparency of the water as it passed over and had experienced a slight sensation of fear. That was the end of our experiment. With patience, it is possible to obtain impressions from almost anything, which will give an accurate account of the experiences it has passed through. For instance, while walking on the hills at Great Malvern, I saw small groups of people of a dark race, with black, lank hair. Men, women, and children were dressed in animal skins. The men had spears in their hands. The name of Iberian seemed to fit them very well. Turning to my left, where previously I had looked down on the level plain, I saw nothing but a vast expanse of sea, glittering in the sunlight as every tiny wavelet reflected its sparkle of light, dazzling to the eye. Turning again to continue my walk, I noticed that another part of the plain had the appearance of a forest with clearly visible pathways leading in various directions through the undergrowth. A friend to whom I mentioned these experiences told me that Malvern had once been a royal chase, and that there was a legend of a monk, who, having to do penance by travelling from the foot of the hill to the summit, along the stony road on his bare knees, expressed the hope that the waters of the Bristol Channel would once again flow over the valley. So, what I had seen were probably impressions on the Earth's aura of scenes of former days. No doubt you have read of dowsers who not only locate underground water without an instrument but also claim to see the water as well. I would like to tell you of one experience of mine of a similar kind. A friend with whom I was staying in Cornwall invited me to try to find water under his grounds. I told him that I was not a dowser, but would like to try, just for the experience. We could not find a twig, so I tried by holding out my hands before me, palms downwards, and walking about blindfold. After walking for a time without result, my friend took off the hoodwink and explained that he had led me over the lawn, underneath which were the rainwater tanks, just to see if I felt any reaction. We tried in another part of the grounds, where I found my arms strongly affected. We mapped out the course of a supposed stream with stones, when suddenly I became aware that I could see a tiny stream of water, apparently about 15 feet below the surface. When visiting a different part of Cornwall, I had another experience of seeing underground. Becoming tired, after walking along some field paths, I sat down to rest on a granite step at the foot of a stile. After a while I became aware that I was looking down into the earth, watching some queer little creatures coming out of a cleft in the rock. They were about 3 inches in height, and save for the thinness of their limbs, were fashioned much like human beings. They were jovial little creatures, all smiles, and apparently just as amused at my appearance as I was at theirs, for they seemed fully conscious that I could see them as they could see me. The most peculiar thing I noticed about them was that each carried a small pick or pickaxe. It flashed across my mind from some association that perhaps they were called pixies. I wondered if the name had originated through their being seen with picks, and the word being changed to pix or pixies, by the use of the double plural, which is commonly used in the West Country. My friends tell me it is not so, and my dictionary does not help, for it simply states, etymology unknown. If you will look up the issue of our journal for June 1936, you will find an interesting article on music, color and radiesthesia, by Guinevere de Beaumont, ARCM, in which she quotes a saying of Louis Bertrand Castel, that every period light has been compared with sound. This brought to my mind some personal experiences of the interaction of light, sound, color, and form, which I trust you will find interesting. One hot summer's day I was in the city of Exeter, and in the afternoon I visited the cathedral. You can easily imagine the contrast between the glare of the sun outside and the dim religious light inside. The service had already begun when I entered, and as I stood absorbed in the beauty of the music and the singing of the anthem, I became aware of delicate tints of color floating about above the heads of the choristers, slowly forming themselves into bands of colors, until they filled the whole of the space high up above the choir with a beautiful luminous mist, which, for color, I can only compare with the rainbow. The other experience occurred in a Devonshire church during divine service, where, during the singing of the psalms, I saw 2 forms floating above the choir, one on either side. They appeared to be formed of a material resembling grey smoke. One was shaped like a large harp, and the other like the long trumpet which is spoken of as the resurrection trumpet. In the same church I witnessed a peculiar example of radiation from the human organism, when the rector, the late Earl of Devon, gave the benediction. As he held up his hand, and spoke the words of the blessing, I noticed tiny tongues of flame emanating from his fingertips. In the course of conversation with him afterwards, he told me that he had no recollection of feeling any particular sensation at the time. As divining and divination appear to mean much about the same thing, I will tell you of an experience which will illustrate the universal method of conveying knowledge by means of symbols, and which comes within the definition of divination. A lady friend, of some 70 summers, was spending a holiday with us. Round the fireside in the evening, we used to discuss this subject, of which she had a wide experience. One evening I saw on her lap a tiny baby dressed in a white frock with short sleeves. The sleeves were tied up with blue ribbons. It happens that when I was a child it was the custom in London, if nowhere else, to tie up the sleeves of girl babies with blue ribbons, and boy babies with red ribbons, so I told our friend that I saw a little baby girl on her lap. To our surprise she replied, "That must be my daughter-in-law's, but do not tell me it is a girl, I did so hope it would be a boy." It is said that coming events cast their shadows before, and so it proved on this occasion. For some months afterwards we had a letter from our friend to tell us that we were quite right, for a little granddaughter had come to town. I do not pretend to know how knowledge of a future event becomes known to us. Probably it is concealed in the mystery of the divisions of time, past, present, and future. Before I relate some experiences in medical diagnosis, I had better tell you what I consider a good definition of diagnosis: the clear cognition of what is really the matter. My own experiences of clairvoyant diagnosis without an instrument have proved singularly accurate without exception. Here is an account of a very simple one. The host of a guest house where I was staying asked if I would look over him to try to discover what was the matter with him. He complained of a most distressful feeling of insecurity. One leg failed him occasionally, and he had difficulty in saving himself from falling. Before he could complete his story, there flashed into my consciousness an awareness of the seat of his trouble. "It is quite a simple matter," I told him. "There is a pressure on the femoral artery of your left leg, which impedes the circulation of the blood. Your leg is therefore almost lifeless at times and fails to support the weight of the body." "I believe you are right," he replied. "I am wearing an appliance which has become uncomfortable lately and becomes misplaced. When the necessary adjustment was made, the trouble ceased." I also thought it wise to tell him that I could see the fibers of his muscles, which appeared deficient in fat, for there was hardly a particle visible. He was not surprised, for he told me that he had been fasting in an endeavor to cure himself of what he thought might be blood pressure as the cause of his falling about. On another occasion, a man with whom I was in conversation happened to mention that he had never had a day's illness in his life. "But your collarbone has been fractured just here, at some time," I said, touching the spot with the tip of my finger. "How did you know that?" he asked. "I can see the slight ridge where it was joined," I told him. "You are quite right," he replied, "but that was an accident, not an illness." It struck me as rather a subtle argument to prove himself in the right, but I agree that he had the best of it. Something else, though, concerned with his heart, which showed up quite clearly to me, I could not tell him, for fear that it might alarm him and make him ill. That is a difficulty which presents itself to those who see things in this way. During a period of several months, I had an occasional opportunity of witnessing the development of a malignant growth in the breast of a woman, and watched a long fiber reach over the shoulder and partly down the arm. She was being attended to by her medical advisor all the time and was eventually operated upon. I learned that the opening corresponded with the position of the fiber that I had seen. It is my opinion that much of our inner knowledge is gained through the action of our aura. I once saw a woman diagnosing another. Her aura extended towards her patient, and I watched it enter the body, and with its surface search round and in the substance of all the internal organs. Perhaps I ought to mention that the human aura has the appearance of a luminous haze, which expands and contracts, and changes color according to our mood and the influences of our environment. It is extremely sensitive, something after the manner of a magnetic field. I saw a most beautiful one belonging to a lady who was in a highly exalted mood. It was widely extended, shimmering with light, colored like the rainbow, and radiating from the center rays of golden light. Another one I saw, belonging to the late Bishop of Exeter, while he was taking the service in Exeter Cathedral, was also very extended, and of a deep purple color. A lady was about to give an address to a room full of people. Just as she was about to begin, I noticed her beautifully clear, amber-colored aura rapidly withdraw into her body, where it remained all the time she was speaking. Afterwards I spoke to a friend of hers about it, and she was not surprised, for she knew that the speaker had overheard a spiteful remark spoken about her by an acquaintance. This seems to me, in some degree, to answer the question raised in the issue of our journal for September 1936, that it seems to be a general rule that whenever dowsers have to work in the presence of numerous spectators, their skill seems to fail them. The aura can be worked upon mentally, so as to case-harden it and render it impervious to any particular influence desired, but unless this is done, the highly sensitive aura of the dowser is liable to be confused by the auric emanations of the spectators, particularly those of the very positive type of person who strongly desires to prove that dowsing is not a psychical process, thus rendering the results uncertain. From what I have told you, I think you will agree that there are more things in heaven and earth than we dreamed of when we set out to study all matters connected with the perception of radiation by the human organism. In conclusion, it seems to me that our study, which commences with the mystery of man in search of water to supply his bodily needs, would, if continued, lead us in the end to the quest of his soul for God, to satisfy his spiritual needs.